For questioning my mother after the entry log showed she entered before the fire at my condo? I'm Nora, 38, and for most of my life, I was the daughter everyone trusted with keys, passwords, spare checks, emergency rides, and uncomfortable family secrets. My husband Lucas used to joke that my family didn't call me because they missed me. They called because something needed fixing. I laughed the first few times he said it. Then my grandmother left me her condo, and suddenly nobody was laughing. My grandmother had lived there for almost 20 years. It wasn't large or fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a narrow kitchen with cabinets she refused to replace because, according to her, wood doesn't expire, and a living room that always smelled faintly like tea and whatever hand lotion she was using that month. I was the one who spent the most time there during her last few years. That isn't me trying to win some competition over who loved her more. My mother loved her. My Aunt Gloria loved her. Even Elise, my younger sister, loved her in the way Elise loved most people. Warmly and sincerely when she was around, but without reorganizing much of her life for them. I was simply the one who could be counted on. I picked up prescriptions. I sat through appointments. I changed light bulbs. I argued with the cable company. I drove her to get her hair done every 3 weeks because she hated the way the salon near her condo cut bangs. When she became less steady on her feet, Lucas and I started doing grocery runs for her on Sundays. Most weeks, I would find her sitting at the little round table by the window with the same pale blue teacup in front of her. It had a tiny gold line around the rim and a faded rose on one side. She owned nicer cups. She always used that one. After she died, I found out she had left the condo to me. Not to all the grandchildren. Not to my mother. Not to be split between Elise and me. To me. The attorney explained it plainly. The deed transferred to me under her estate plan, and the rest of her assets were distributed according to the other provisions she had made. My parents were gracious at first. My mother, Celeste, hugged me and said, "She knew how much you did for her." My father, Victor, nodded and said, "It makes sense." Elise said, "Good for you." Then about 2 weeks later, my mother called it Grandma's place. Not your condo. Not the condo. Grandma's place. It sounded harmless, so I let it go. A week after that, she said, "I hope you keep Grandma's place useful to the family." I asked what she meant. She said, "Nothing. I just mean it would be sad for it to become one more investment property." That bothered me more than I admitted. Lucas noticed. He asked me that night, "Did your mom just assign a moral obligation to a piece of real estate you legally own?" I told him not to start. He smiled, but not because he thought it was funny. The truth was, Lucas had seen my family dynamic clearly for years. I was the reliable one. Elise was the one everyone rushed to rescue. Elise is 6 years younger than I am. She isn't evil, useless, stupid, or any of the other things people sometimes call the favored sibling in family stories. She's funny. She can be generous. She remembers birthdays better than I do. Kids love her. She also has a remarkable ability to turn preventable problems into emergencies that someone else is expected to solve. She has needed help with rent after spending money she had set aside. She has needed rides after forgetting to renew her registration. She once called me crying from a grocery store parking lot because her debit card had been declined and she was too embarrassed to leave the cart. I paid for the groceries. My mother later told me that was what sisters did. No one ever asked why sisters apparently only worked in one direction. The condo became a source of tension slowly. Lucas and I didn't have some grand luxury plan for it. We were deciding whether to sell it or rent it out after making a few repairs. Either option would help our finances. We had also talked about keeping it for a year while we sorted through my grandmother's things without rushing. That mattered to me. Her clothes were still in one closet. There were old photos in drawers, recipes written on index cards, boxes of holiday decorations, a small sewing kit, and half a dozen pieces of furniture that nobody wanted until I mentioned selling them. Then suddenly, everyone remembered sentimental attachments. My mother still had access to the condo because months before my grandmother died, I had given her a spare key and the temporary code to the smart lock. I had asked her to water some plants while Lucas and I were away for a few days. The temporary code was supposed to be temporary. I never deleted it. That part is on me. Lucas reminded me twice. The first time I said I would take care of it. The second time he said, Nora, just change the code. I said, she's my mother. I don't want to make it weird. He looked at me for a second and said, changing a door code is only insulting if someone thinks they're entitled to keep using it. I rolled my eyes. I wish I had listened. The real fight started after Elise's relationship began falling apart. She and Trent had been together off and on for several years. By that point, they were in one of their worst periods. They had been fighting about money, his drinking with friends, her spending, his job instability, her suspicion that he was talking to someone else, and probably a dozen other things I only heard in fragments. Then Elise announced they were taking space. In Elise's language, that meant she needed somewhere to live immediately. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening. She started with, your sister is in a bad situation. I asked if she was safe. Yes, physically. But she can't stay where she is. I asked whether Elise had somewhere temporary. My mother paused. Then she said, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I already knew. She said, Grandma's place is sitting there empty. I told her it wasn't available. She said, Nora, I'm not asking you to give it away. No. Can you at least hear me out? I know what you're asking. The answer is no. Her voice changed. Not louder, just sharper. Elise needs a few months. I'm sorry she's in that situation, but Lucas and I are making plans for the condo. What plans could possibly be more important than your sister having a safe place to sleep? There it was. The family test. Anything I wanted became selfish as soon as Elise wanted something too. I said, she can stay with you. Our place isn't practical. It's practical enough to keep her from being homeless. That's not the point. It sounds exactly like the point. My mother sighed in the way she did when she wanted me to feel childish. She's 32 years old. She needs some dignity. I almost laughed. Apparently, dignity meant my house, my utilities, and no rent. I asked, has Elise even asked me? She's embarrassed. Then she can be embarrassed and ask me herself. My mother said, why do you always make everything so formal? I said, because when nobody asks clearly, everybody pretends I agreed later. That line turned out to be more accurate than I knew. Elise called the next day. She didn't directly ask for the condo. She talked about how difficult things had been. She said Trent was not giving her space. She said staying with our parents would make her feel like a teenager again. I listened. Finally, she said, Mom mentioned Grandma's place. I said, she did. Another pause. I wouldn't need it long. I'm not offering it, Elise. I know. Then what are we talking about? She got irritated. You don't have to make me beg. I'm not asking you to beg. I'm telling you it's not available. It's empty. It's mine. That landed badly. She said, wow. I said, don't do that. Do what? Act like me saying I own my own condo is some cruel statement. I just didn't know you saw things that way. What way? Like everything is yours, yours, yours. I said, that is literally how ownership works. She hung up on me. I felt guilty for the rest of the evening. That's embarrassing to admit now. I knew I had done nothing wrong and I still felt guilty. Lucas came into the kitchen while I was cleaning a countertop that was already clean. He asked what happened. I told him. He leaned against the counter and said, you said no. Yes. Clearly. Yes. Then leave it there. I told him my mother was going to turn it into a whole thing. He said, she can turn it into a parade if she wants. No is still no. Over the next 2 weeks, both of my parents kept revisiting the subject. My mother sent apartment listings to Elise in a family text thread, then followed them with comments like, too expensive. Such a shame when there's an empty home in the family. My father called and tried the calm, reasonable approach. He said, your mother is emotional. I'm not going to guilt you. Then he spent 20 minutes guilting me in a quieter voice. A home should be used. It will be. When? When Lucas and I decide. And until then? It stays mine. He said, Nobody is disputing that on paper. That phrase stuck with me. On paper. I asked what he meant. He said, "You know what I mean. Families share things." I said, "Do they share things after the owner says no?" He told me I was getting defensive. Around that same time, Elise asked me for the Wi-Fi password at the condo. She did it casually. We were having coffee and she said, "Did Grandma ever change the Wi-Fi password? Or is it still that ridiculous flower thing?" I stared at her. She laughed and said, "What? Why do you need the Wi-Fi password?" "I don't. I was just wondering." "Why?" "You're being weird." Maybe that should have been enough for me to change the locks that day. It wasn't. I told myself I was suspicious because everyone had been arguing. Then Priya texted me. Priya lived a few doors down from my grandmother's condo. She had known my grandmother for years and had my number because she used to check on her occasionally. Her message said, "Hey Nora, are you moving things into the condo? Heard what sounded like bins or luggage rolling down the hallway late last night. Just wanted to make sure everything's okay." I read it twice. Then I called my mother. I asked if she had been at the condo. She said yes immediately. That actually reassured me for about 5 seconds. "What were you doing there?" "I picked up a few of Mom's things." "At night?" "I was already nearby." "What things?" "Some photo albums. A box from the closet." "Why?" Priya heard things being moved. My mother sounded offended. "So now the neighbors are reporting on me?" "No one is reporting on you." She asked if I was moving stuff. "Well, I was not stealing anything." "I didn't say you were." I wanted to ask whether Elise had been there. I didn't. That was the moment when I chose avoiding a fight over getting a clear answer. Lucas wasn't happy. When I told him, he said, "Change the code tonight." I said, "Mom said she was just getting Grandma's things. Do you believe her?" "I don't know." "Then change it." "I will." He looked at me. "When?" I snapped. "Why are you acting like she's a burglar?" He went quiet. Then he said, "I'm not. I'm acting like someone who heard your neighbor say people were moving things into a property your family has been pressuring you to hand over." I felt defensive because he was right. I said, "I don't want my mother finding out I locked her out and turning this into another war." Lucas said something I remembered later almost word for word. "A boundary you're afraid to enforce is not a boundary." I told him I understood. Then I did nothing. 9 days later, the condo caught fire. The call came shortly after 7 p.m. At first, I thought it was a scam because the number was unfamiliar. A man identified himself and asked if I owned a unit at the condo building. I said yes. He told me there had been a fire. I remember standing in the hallway of our house with my keys in one hand, and my phone pressed so hard to my ear that it hurt. Lucas saw my face and stopped asking questions. We drove over. I will never forget the smell. The smell hit me before the damage did. Wet drywall. Smoke. Melted plastic. That chemical, sour odor from burned synthetic fabric. The hallway outside the unit was damp, and there were dark marks around the doorway. The fire had been contained before it destroyed the whole unit, but the living room and part of the second bedroom had sustained serious damage. Firefighters had opened sections of wall. Water had soaked into the flooring. The curtains were burned. A side table had warped from heat and water. I stood there looking at the room and thinking about how my grandmother used to complain if anybody put a sweating glass directly on that table. Then I saw one of her photo boxes on the floor. Water had gotten inside. I crouched down before anyone could stop me and started lifting out pictures. Some were already sticking together. Lucas knelt next to me and said, "Nora, don't." "Not yet." I kept going until he put his hand over mine. That was when I started crying. Not loudly. I just sat there on my heels with a wet photograph in my hand and cried. A firefighter later told us the preliminary origin appeared to be near the living room area. There had been a portable space heater plugged into an extension cord. There were signs that combustibles had been too close to the heat source. He was careful with his wording. Nothing was final. It might have been electrical. It might have involved the heater. The report would take time. I remember thinking, space heater? There hadn't been a space heater in that condo when I last visited. Then I noticed other things. A pair of women's sneakers near the bedroom. A phone charger I didn't recognize. A grocery receipt from 3 days earlier. A sweatshirt draped over the back of a chair, damp and smelling like smoke. None of it belonged to me. None of it belonged to Lucas. I knew whose it was. I called my mother from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. I said, "The condo caught fire." There was a silence that was just a little too long. Then she said, "Oh my God. Is everyone okay?" Everyone. I noticed that word. I said, "What do you mean everyone? I mean, was anyone hurt? Why would anyone be there?" She didn't answer directly. I said, "Mom." Then my father's voice came into the background. I couldn't hear the whole sentence. My mother came back on and said, "This is exactly what happens when people let things get more complicated than they need to be." I stared across the parking lot at the building. "What are you talking about?" She said, "Maybe this is what happens when you choose property over family." I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it. I thought I had misheard her. I said, "My condo is burned and you're telling me I deserved it?" I didn't say deserved. You just said maybe this is what happens. If Elise had been allowed to stay properly, none of this sneaking around would have happened. There it was. She said it before she realized she had said it. I went cold. I asked, "What's sneaking around?" She tried to recover immediately. "I'm upset. You're upset. This is not the time." Was Elise living there? Nora. Was Elise living there? My father took the phone. He said, "Do not start accusing people tonight." I said, "Was Elise in my condo?" He said, "Everyone is safe. That is what matters." Then he added, "Insurance is for accidents." I hadn't mentioned insurance. Lucas was standing next to me. He couldn't hear every word, but he could see my face. I hung up. He asked, "They knew?" I said, "I think they knew." The next morning, I met with the insurance adjuster and later spoke with an investigator assigned, because there were questions about occupancy and access. I was tired, angry, and still trying to convince myself there might be some explanation that didn't involve my family deliberately using my condo after I had said no. The investigator asked routine questions. Who lived there? No one officially. Was it vacant? Not completely. I was still sorting my grandmother's belongings and checking the place. Who had keys? I said me. My husband. My mother had a spare from before. He asked whether there was a smart lock. I said yes. He asked if it kept an entry history. I opened the app. I had barely used the log before. Mostly I checked battery alerts. There it was. My code. Lucas's code. And my mother's code. Used the night Priya had heard the rolling bins. Used 2 days later. Used again. Then used the night of the fire. The timestamp was 18 minutes before the building's smoke alarm system registered the first alert tied to my unit. I stared at the screen. The investigator asked, "Is Celeste your mother?" Yes. Was she authorized to enter that night? I didn't answer immediately. He asked again more carefully. Did she have permission to access the unit? I said, she had an old code. She did not have permission to use the condo for anyone to stay there. He asked, who still had a key? I said, apparently more people than I understood. Afterward, I sat in my car and called my mother. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. So I texted her. Why was your code used at the condo 18 minutes before the fire alarm? She called me within a minute. Her first words were, do not make this legal. Not hello. Not I can explain. Do not make this legal. I said, I asked why your code was used. I did not ask for a speech. She said, Elise needed somewhere to go. I said no. She was desperate. I said no. You were being stubborn. So you gave her access anyway? I let my daughter sleep somewhere safe. My property. Your grandmother's home. My property. She raised her voice. You care more about that word than people. I said. Did you give Elise my code? She didn't have your code. That answer was too specific. I said. So how was she getting in? Silence. Then she said, I opened it when she needed me to. I felt sick. You were going there to let her in? It was temporary. How long? Not long. How long? A little over a week. Priya's message had been 9 days before the fire. I closed my eyes. I said, Mom, she moved in. She brought some things. She moved in after I said no. She needed stability. And Trent. Another pause. I said, was Trent staying there too? He came by. How often? I don't know. Was he there the night of the fire? My mother said, that is not the important part. I laughed once and there was nothing funny in it. I said, a heater that was not mine may have caused a fire in my condo, while people I did not authorize were staying there. Tell me what part you think is important. She started crying. That used to work on me immediately. I would soften my voice. I would start reassuring her. I would end up apologizing for how I had asked a question instead of getting an answer. This time I just waited. Finally, she said, I was trying to keep Elise safe. I said, you used a key. She said, Nora, please. You did not ask for help. You used a key. I ended the call. That afternoon, Elise texted me. I know you're mad. I didn't respond. Then she sent, I was going to tell you. I wrote, when? She replied, once things calmed down. I said, you mean once you were already living there long enough that you thought I wouldn't make you leave? She took several minutes. Then she wrote, I thought you would calm down once I was already there. I stared at that sentence. It was almost exactly what I had accused her of. I called her. She answered and immediately said, I was not trying to steal your place. You knew I said no. I thought you were saying no because you were mad at Mom. I said no to you too. I was in a bad place. That doesn't make yes appear out of nowhere. She started crying. I asked about Trent. She said he had come over a few times. I asked about the heater. She said it belonged to him. I asked why he brought a space heater. She said the condo felt cold at night. I said, you were there at night. She said nothing. I asked, was he there when the fire started? She said, he had been there. That is not what I asked. He left. When? I don't know. Not long before. I asked where she had been. She said she had gone to get food. So my mother had opened the condo, Elise had been staying there, Trent had brought in a heater, and somehow everybody wanted me to believe this was still basically an unfortunate misunderstanding. Later that night, another piece fell into place. Priya sent me a screenshot. She wrote, not sure if this matters, but I remember seeing this a few days ago. It's gone now. It was a screenshot of Trent's social media story. The photo showed his feet on my grandmother's coffee table. In the background was an old portable space heater. The caption complained about old wiring in cheap places. I had no idea whether the wiring was actually old enough to be a factor, and I wasn't interested in pretending I could determine a fire cause from a social media post. What mattered to me was that he had posted himself inside my condo with the exact type of appliance the fire investigator had already asked about, then deleted it. Lucas came home and found me at the dining table with my laptop open, my phone next to it, and printed copies of the lock history spread out in front of me. He looked at everything. Then he asked, how long? More than a week. He sat down. I said, Mom was letting her in. He rubbed both hands over his face. I expected him to tell me he had warned me. He didn't. That almost made it worse. I said, go ahead. What? Say it. I'm not going to say I told you so. You did tell me. Yes. And I ignored you. Yes. I got angry. Not because he was being cruel. He wasn't. I got angry because I wanted someone to tell me I had been powerless. I hadn't been. I had made choices too. I said, so what, this is my fault now? Lucas looked at me for a long moment. No. You keep bringing up the code. Because the code mattered. I did not cause the fire. I know. I did not give Elise permission. I know. My mother lied to me. I know. I was almost shouting by then. Then Lucas said quietly, I'm not mad that you trusted your mom. I am scared you still want to protect her more than us. That stopped me. He continued, You're already thinking about what to tell insurance, so nobody gets in too much trouble. I can see it. I didn't answer. As I was. He said, This affects us too. The deductible affects us. Repairs affect us. Liability affects us. The time you're going to spend dealing with this affects us. I know. I'm not asking you to hate them. I am asking you to stop handing them the door code to our life. That hurt because he wasn't talking about a keypad anymore. I started crying again. I told him, I don't know how to do this without blowing everything up. He said, Then don't blow anything up. Tell the truth. That became my plan. Not revenge. Not punishment. Not some dramatic campaign to ruin my family. I decided I would tell the truth exactly once to every person who had a legitimate reason to know it, and I would stop editing that truth to make my family more comfortable. I changed every access code connected to the condo. I deactivated my mother's code. I arranged for the physical lock to be rekeyed once access was permitted. I saved screenshots of the entry history. I downloaded copies. I saved Priya's messages. I saved Elise's text saying she thought I would calm down once she was already there. I saved the screenshot of Trent's post. I requested the preliminary fire documentation and kept every email from insurance. Then my father made things worse. He called while I was speaking with a contractor, so I let it go to voicemail. His message said, Nora, do not tell the adjuster everything. You will only make this worse. Just tell them Elise had permission to be there. Insurance is for accidents. Family does not turn family into a claim. Call me before you say anything else. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it in 3 places. That voicemail changed something in me. Until then, some part of me had still been trying to classify what happened as a bad decision made under stress. My mother wanted to help Elise. Elise needed somewhere to stay. Trent was careless. A fire happened. But my father wasn't talking about helping Elise anymore. He was asking me to change facts. He wanted me to say I had given permission when I hadn't. Not because it was true. Because it would make things easier for them. I called him back. He answered with, Finally. I said, I am not telling insurance Elise had permission. He sighed. Nora, listen to me. No. Do not be emotional. I am not being emotional. I am being accurate. You are turning an accident into something else. I didn't make Mom use an old code after I said no. Your mother was trying to help. I didn't make Elise move in. She had nowhere else. She had your house. That was not workable. I didn't make Trent bring a heater. We don't even know that caused anything. I agree. That's what investigators are for. He got angry then. He said, You really want your sister chased for money over this? I want the person reviewing the claim to have the actual facts. Family does not do this. I said, Family also does not enter someone's home after being told no. He said, That is a very cold way to talk about your mother. I said, It is a very accurate way to talk about a key. Then I hung up. I gave the insurer a written statement. I kept it factual. I explained that I owned the condo. I explained that Elise had asked about staying there, and I had explicitly refused. I explained that my mother retained an old key and access code from an earlier period when I had authorized her to water plants. I explained that I had not authorized my mother to let Elise occupy the unit. I provided the relevant lock history and messages. I did not accuse anyone of arson. I did not claim Trent caused the fire. I did not exaggerate. I did not speculate. That distinction mattered to me. The fire itself appeared to be accidental. The unauthorized occupancy was not. Within days, pieces of my family's version of events started reaching extended relatives. Nobody confronted me in a giant group chat. It was more realistic and in some ways more exhausting than that. A cousin texted, "I heard Elise is basically homeless now. Is there really no way to work this out privately?" An uncle called and said, "Your parents are beside themselves." A family friend told me, "Your sister lost enough already." Someone else said my mother was terrified I was trying to have her charged. I had never said that. My mother was telling people I was threatening to ruin the family over a misunderstanding about permission. That wording was clever. A misunderstanding about permission sounded like two people remembering a conversation differently. It didn't sound like me saying no, then my mother using an old code anyway. Aunt Gloria contacted me last. She was my mother's younger sister. She usually avoided taking sides. She said, "I think everyone needs to sit down before this becomes permanent." I told her, "Insurance is already involved. I'm not asking you to lie to insurance. Mom is." There was a pause. Gloria said, "She says you had told Elise you would think about it." I told Elise no. She says there was some ambiguity. There wasn't. Gloria sighed. "Would you come to dinner Saturday? Your parents, Elise, me. No Trent." I almost refused. Lucas didn't tell me what to do. He asked, "What would going accomplish?" I said, "Maybe nothing." "Then why go?" "Because they're telling people I changed my story after the fire." He nodded. "So you want the people they pulled into this to hear the timeline from you?" "Yes." "Then go for that reason. Not because you think your mom is going to suddenly admit everything." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Saturday dinner at Gloria's house was uncomfortable before anyone even sat down. My mother looked tired and offended. My father barely greeted me. Elise was already there, sitting at the table with a glass of water she kept turning in circles. Lucas came with me, but he had told me beforehand that he wouldn't speak for me unless someone pulled him into it directly. Gloria served food nobody really ate. For the first 10 minutes, everyone talked about traffic, a relative's medical appointment, and some problem with Gloria's dishwasher. Finally, my father put his fork down. He said, "We are here because this has gone too far." I said, "Okay." My mother said, "Your sister is sleeping on a friend's couch." I looked at Elise. She looked away. Victor said, "The insurance company does not need every family disagreement." I said, "They asked who was occupying the condo." Celeste said, "Just tell them she had permission." Lucas shifted next to me. I said, "She didn't." My mother pressed her lips together. "You were considering it." "No." "You said you needed to talk to Lucas." I said Lucas and I had plans for the condo. That is not permission. You never gave us a final answer in writing. I actually stared at her. Then I said, "I gave you a final answer out loud. Several times." Victor said, "This is what I mean. You're arguing over technicalities." "No, Dad. Permission is not a technicality." Elise finally spoke. "I thought you would calm down." I turned to her. "You already texted me that." My mother shot Elise a look. That was when I realized they had not coordinated perfectly. Victor said, "Nobody is denying there was confusion." I opened the folder I had brought. Not some giant revenge binder. Just a plain folder with printed pages because I didn't want anyone grabbing my phone, and because I wanted dates in front of me. I said, "There was no confusion." My mother said, "Nora, do not do this." I looked at Gloria. Mom asked me to let Elise stay there. I said no. Elise brought it up separately. I said no to her too. I slid over a printout of the relevant text exchange. Elise said, "You're really printing my messages now?" I said, "You told people I changed my story." I didn't. "Then tell them I said no." She looked down. My mother jumped in. She was under enormous stress. I said, "That has nothing to do with whether I said no." I put down the lock log. Mom's old code was used the night Priya heard bins being moved. It was used again after that. It was used 18 minutes before the smoke alarm on the night of the fire. Gloria looked at my mother. Celeste said, "I had every right to visit my mother's home." I said, "Grandma was dead. It was my home." That is exactly the attitude that started all of this. No. My saying no started none of this. Your refusal to accept no did. Victor said. Enough. I ignored him. I placed Elise's text beside the lock log. I asked Elise why she moved in after I refused. She wrote, I thought you would calm down once I was already there. My mother said. She was upset. I said. It confirmed she knew I had not agreed. Then I played my father's voicemail. Not loudly. I put my phone on the table and let his own voice fill the space between us. Do not tell the adjuster everything. Just tell them Elise had permission to be there. Victor's face changed. He said, You had no right to record me. I said, You left me a voicemail. Gloria closed her eyes for a second. Then she looked at Celeste. Did Nora ever say yes? My mother started talking about Elise's breakup. Gloria repeated, Did Nora ever say yes? My mother said, It's not that simple. Gloria said, It is a yes or no question. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. She said, I was trying to keep my daughter safe. I said, Did I say yes? My mother looked at me with a kind of anger I had rarely seen from her. No. There it was. One syllable. Not a misunderstanding. Not ambiguity. No. Elise started crying. She said, I didn't think this would happen. I believed her. That was the worst part. I didn't think Elise expected a fire. I didn't think my mother expected a fire. I didn't think my father expected an insurance investigation to pull apart the story they planned to tell. They expected the usual thing. They expected me to absorb the consequences. I said, I know you didn't plan a fire. Elise looked up. I continued, But you knew I said no. Mom knew I said no. Dad knows that now, and he asked me to tell insurance something different. Victor said, Because I was trying to stop you from destroying your sister over an accident. I said, I am not destroying Elise. My mother snapped, You are choosing walls and keys over your own blood. I said, You keep saying that like the walls and keys walked into themselves. She started crying harder. For once I didn't rush to comfort her. I said, You did not make a family decision. You made a decision with my property and expected me to absorb the fire. Gloria told my mother, Celeste, you can't keep calling this family help when Nora refused. My mother said, So you're against me too? Gloria said, I'm against pretending she agreed. That was the point when the balance in the room changed. Not because everyone suddenly hated my parents. Nobody applauded. Nobody delivered a speech. Gloria looked upset. Elise looked miserable. Victor looked furious. Lucas looked tired. It was ugly. It was also clear. I told them what I had decided. I am not changing my statement. I am not telling insurance Elise had permission. I am not signing anything saying she did. I am not waiving anyone's responsibility before the claim is finished. All access to the condo is revoked. Mom, you do not get keys or codes to my property anymore. Dad, do not call me again to tell me what facts to hide. My mother said, You are punishing us. I said, No, I am removing access. She said, Same thing. It is not. Elise asked, What am I supposed to do? That question hit me because it was so familiar. What am I supposed to do? Usually the real meaning was, What are you going to do for me? I said, Find housing you have permission to use. She flinched. I almost softened it. I didn't. Then she said, I can't afford a deposit right now. I said, I'm sorry. She stared at me. I had paid deposits for her before. Covered shortfalls. Sent money when something broke. I said, I am not paying this one. My mother whispered, Unbelievable. Lucas spoke for the first time. He said, What is unbelievable is that you still think Nora is the emergency fund after all this. Victor turned on him. This is family business. Lucas said, The condo is my wife's property. The deductible comes out of our household finances, and you asked her to make a false statement that affects our claim. You made it our business. That was all he said. We left not long after. The insurance process took months. It didn't end with some dramatic criminal arrest. The fire remained classified as accidental based on the available evidence. The investigation focused on the heater, the extension setup, nearby combustible material, and occupancy circumstances. The insurer treated the fact that Elise and Trent had been using the condo without my authorization as significant. There were questions about liability. There were questions about whether subrogation would be pursued against Trent or others depending on the final findings. Elise received correspondence she was not happy about. Trent received more. He suddenly became much less casual about calling the condo cheap and blaming the wiring once he had to answer formal questions. He tried to tell Elise the heater had been fine. Elise told my mother he was abandoning her. My mother called me once and said, "He is letting her take all the blame." I said, "Then Elise should give the insurer accurate information." She hung up. My parents were not shunned by the family. That would have been unrealistic. Some relatives still thought I had been too hard. One aunt told me, "Legally, you may be right, but family is not only legal." I told her I agreed. Family was also trust. She didn't have much to say after that. Other relatives changed their tone once Gloria told them directly that my mother had admitted I never gave permission. Nobody organized a campaign on my behalf. They just stopped repeating my parents' version so confidently. That mattered. My father lost his role as the reasonable translator of every family conflict because people now knew he had left me a voicemail asking me to tell insurance Elise had permission. My mother hated that detail more than almost anything. She said I had humiliated them by playing it. I told her I had played it only in front of people she and my father had already involved. She said that was different. I said it was not. The condo was reparable, but the repair process was miserable. Smoke got into things that had never burned. Water damaged items in rooms the flames never reached. Sections of drywall had to be removed. Flooring had to come up. I paid a deductible. There were delays. There were calls I took during lunch, inspections I had to schedule, forms that needed signatures, and lists of damaged property I didn't want to make. There is something awful about assigning dollar values to the belongings of a dead person. Photograph album damaged. Side table damaged. Curtains destroyed. Upholstered chair smoke damage. Teacup cracked. That teacup survived. The pale blue one with the gold rim. I found it after the fire in a wet cardboard box that had partly collapsed. The cup had a crack running from the rim down toward the base. Not shattered. Just broken enough that you would never drink from it again. I wrapped it in a towel and took it home. Lucas asked if I was sure I wanted to keep it. I said yes. He said, "Okay." That was all. For a while it sat in a cabinet because looking at it made me angry. Not at Trent. Not even at Elise. At myself. I kept thinking about the code. Change the code. Such a small action. I could have done it in less than a minute. I had not done it because I didn't want my mother to feel like I distrusted her. And because I hadn't wanted to feel like the kind of daughter who needed to lock her mother out. That became one of the hardest conversations Lucas and I had after the fire. Not because he blamed me. Because I wanted him to pretend my choices had nothing to do with anything. One night, months into the claim, I asked him, "Do you trust me now?" He knew exactly what I meant. He said, "Yes." I asked, "Completely?" He thought before answering. "I trust that you would tell the truth now even if your parents hate it." That stung. I said, "That's not a yes. It is the yes I have." I sat with that. Then he said, "I never stopped trusting that you loved me. I stopped trusting that you would protect our household from them, when protecting us meant disappointing them." That was fair. Painful but fair. I told him, I thought saying no was enough. He said, "With normal people it usually is." I laughed a little. He continued, "With people who treat no like a negotiation, you have to act on it." So I did. I changed more than the condo code. My parents no longer held spare keys to our house. My mother no longer had access to any documents just in case. I separated a couple of shared family accounts and subscriptions that had somehow become my responsibility over the years. I stopped sending Elise small amounts of money whenever she was short. None of that was revenge. It felt like revenge to them because they were used to access. That was the part one had not understood before. When people are accustomed to your time, money, property, passwords, and forgiveness, removing access feels like an attack even when you are only returning things to normal. My relationship with my parents became distant. Not no contact. There were birthday texts, holiday calls, occasional visits with other relatives present. But my mother never again walked into my home using a key she assumed she was entitled to keep. Elise and I didn't speak for several months. When we finally did, it was because Gloria was having a medical procedure and asked both of us to help coordinate a few things. We were civil. Afterward, Elise asked if we could talk. We sat in my car because neither of us wanted the conversation overheard. I said, "Do you?" "Sometimes." I appreciated the honesty. She stared out the windshield. Then she said, "I also know I shouldn't have gone in." I waited. She said, "Mom kept saying you'd get over it." I know. I wanted to believe her. I know. I thought if I could just stay there for a week or two, you would see it wasn't hurting anything. I said. Then the fire happened. She nodded. I didn't mean for any of that. I know you didn't. She looked at me. Then why couldn't you help me? That question told me we still had a long way to go. I said, I did help you for years. That's not what I meant. I know. You mean why didn't I help you this time in the exact way you wanted? She got quiet. I said, because I said no. She looked irritated. I continued, that has to be enough, Elise. Not because I'm older. Not because I'm right about everything. Not because I own more than you. Because I'm allowed to say no to something that belongs to me. She said, Mom made it sound like you were just trying to prove a point. I was trying to keep one boundary. She started tearing up. I lost so much. So did I. That came out harder than I intended. She said, I know. I believe that she knew at least some of it. I told her about the photographs, the deductible, the months of repairs, the way Lucas and I had fought, the cup. She said, I'm sorry about Grandma's stuff. It was the first apology that didn't include, but. I said, thank you. We didn't hug. We didn't magically fix everything. But it was the first conversation after the fire that felt like two adults talking instead of one person presenting a crisis and waiting for me to solve it. Eventually, after the repairs were finished, Lucas and I decided to sell the condo. That decision surprised my parents when they heard. My mother said, after everything, you're just selling it? I asked, what did you think I was going to do? She said, I thought you cared about keeping Grandma's home. I said, I cared about Grandma. The condo is a condo. That was another difference between us. My mother had used sentiment whenever it gave her leverage, then acted like I was materialistic whenever ownership gave me a boundary. I didn't want the condo to become a shrine to the worst year of my relationship with my family. We repaired it properly. We documented everything. We sold it. The money went toward our long-term financial plans, exactly the kind of plans my family had treated as less meaningful than Elise's immediate emergency. The sale was not triumphant. I cried after closing. I sat in the car holding the keys one last time and thought about my grandmother at that little table with her tea. I thought about how many Sundays I had spent there. I thought about smoke and wet photos. I thought about my mother saying, Grandma's place, as if the ownership had never actually transferred in her mind. Then I handed over the keys. At home, I finally took the cracked teacup out of the cabinet. I put it on a shelf in our living room. Lucas noticed and asked, You sure? Yes. The crack is obvious if you look at it. I never glued it. I never tried to paint over it. It isn't useful as a cup anymore. It is still worth keeping. That is about as close as I can come to explaining where things are now. My parents and I are not what we were. Elise and I are not what we were. Lucas and I are stronger, but not because the fire somehow helped us. It hurt us first. We had to repair damage that never should have happened. I also stopped telling myself that being the responsible daughter meant absorbing whatever everyone else dropped. My mother had spent years treating my limits like openings for negotiation. My father had spent years making that sound reasonable. Elise had spent years assuming rescue would arrive before consequences did. And I had spent years helping all three of them believe that. The fire didn't create that pattern. It just made it impossible for me to keep pretending I couldn't see it. The condo burned because of an accident. The trust around it did not. That damage came from choices. So did what happened next. I stopped trying to make the crack invisible. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.